Hey guys, CXM. You guys know the drill. Before I start the video, I want to say if you miss catching up with me, feel free to check out my Twitch. I'm generally more active over there than I am here. And another thing is, this is going to be my preemptive Archer guide going into the War Within. I haven't had the most time to play the beta this cycle, but I think I've played it enough to where I have a pretty firm grasp on how to comfortably play Druid and even a little bit of HPAL going into this expansion. Maybe I'll make a video about HPAL. I'll consider it. Going to be going over Ardruid in Mythic Plus specifically, and I'm going to be talking about primarily Keeper of the Grove. I'm not really going to talk about Wildstalker at all, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is the design is so bland that even if I were to talk about it, nothing would really change anyway as far as gameplay wise. There's nothing that I could really tell you that would be new outside of also talking about Keeper of the Grove. So really it would just be kind of the same gameplay as with Dragonflight, except just worse because we don't have Swarm, we don't have our tier set. Maybe, go into a pack, you're going to be cat weaving a little bit more, but that's literally it. There's no, dramatic gameplay shift as there is with Keeper of the Grove. And the other reason is Keeper of the Grove, I think, is just way better by a lot. I think Keeper of the Grove is going to be way more relevant, and there's a lot more gameplay decisions to be made that are new to Ardruid coming with that spec compared to Wildstalker. So I'm sorry if you're here for Wildstalker tips and tricks, but unfortunately, there really isn't anything I could tell you that you wouldn't, one, be able to figure out yourself, and two, just at all. There really isn't much, so let's get into it. Yeah. My webcam's actually over on the right this time because I want to start off by going over the class tree, and I also want to preemptively say that our stat prio isn't really changing. It's still going to be haste first, and then mastery or crit, depending on if you want to do more damage or healing. That's going to remain the exact same, whether you're Wildstalker or Keeper of the Grove. So if you're curious about stats, just wanted to knock that out of the way first. Stats aren't changing. Okay, our stat prio is going to be pretty much the exact same, if not more emphasis on haste because of this talent Sarius might. But let's disregard that. Going over Druid, probably the first thing we should go over is the class tree. The class tree received a pretty significant overhaul. You might notice just at first glance, I have pretty much every single utility node that we were looking for in Dragonflight. Now we can get pretty much everything. We can get Wild Charge, we can get Skull Bash, we can get In-Cap Roar, we can get Typhoon, we can even get Dispel all at the same time. In Dragonflight, this wasn't really possible. Now it is. They removed a lot of throughput nodes, so you'll notice Natural Recovery, it's 1 point now, and it also doesn't give you an increased healing done. Now it's just increased healing received. You're probably not ever going to play this because of that, especially because compared to something like Forest Walk, it's basically just worse by all standards. Earth and Vigor got changed from 2 points to 1. Instead of 20% health increase, now it's 15% for 1 point, just proportionally better than it was in Dragonflight. Ursoc Spirit's new talent, getting 10% increased stamina when you're in bear form. This is just a net buff to bear form. Going from Dragonflight to the War Within, we are about 5% tankier in bear form now, give or take just a little bit. So that's pretty good. Thick Hide is no longer 2 points, it's now just 1 for 4%. Pretty good. You no longer need to get Iron Fur to get down to Thick Hide, which is also very important, because Iron Fur was practically useless. I can think in the past 2 tiers in Mythic Plus, only once where I specifically used Iron Fur in a key, and that was on the third boss of Black Recall, the guy that runs into you and stuff. You used to be able to use Iron Fur, to eat and soak and stuff sometimes, but that was pretty much literally it. You never really use Iron Fur, so it's good. We don't have to worry about that now anymore. We still have some problematic nodes like improved Sunfire. Unfortunately, this still exists. And while we did lose some very annoying throughput nodes, Blizzard also did add some, granted, in spots that I think make a little bit more sense. So down here, above In-Cap Roar, you have Instincts of the Claw. This just increases your bear and cat damage, shred, swipe, rake, mangle, thrash. It's fine for Ardruid for if you're a spec like Boomy. However, this kind of sucks because you're never going to press any of these buttons, and this is basically just a waste of 2 talent points to get into In-Cap Roar. Luckily, this is not a Boomy guide. This is an Ardruid guide, so this is fine for Ardruid. Same for Lore of the Grove to get down to Innervate and Nature's Vigil. Moonfire and Sunfire damage is increased by 10%. That's pretty good, especially as Keeper of the Grove. We have a lot of Moonfires going off with Trance of the Moon. Rejuve and Wild Growth healing increase by 5%. Just fine throughput. Not for the most useful spells of our kit in Mythic Plus, but it's still a throughput increase nonetheless. We have a new point, Oak Skin. Survival Instincts and Bark Skin reduce the damage taken by an additional 10%. I personally think this is useless, kind of for the same reasons of Bark Skin and Verdant Heart, which is that there's no real situation where you need this extra 10%. Our Druid itself is probably the tankiest healer in Mythic Plus just historically, and it currently is. Especially with protective growth. So I don't think you really should be putting a point into this. Obviously you can, and we actually have a couple points to spare. You know, if you wanted to, you can get rid of Nature's Vigil, because this still doesn't really do that much healing anyway, or damage I should say. You can take a point out of that, go Extend. You can take a point out of Innervate, go something else like Forest Walk, which I would recommend doing. I think Forest Walk's actually really strong now, but I don't think you're really going to play this. You could even go Primal Fury if you wanted to, or Ursoc Spirit if you wanted the more Bear Stam. Point is, long story short, the talent tree is much better. There's still a bit to be desired again because we still have stuff like Improved Sunfire, but compared to Dragonflight, it's a massive step up, and you actually have a couple points to work with now. There's one talent that, for those who understand the tree, might have noticed I skipped over, I'm going to talk about now, which is Fluid Form. This, I think, is probably the most important of the Druid class tree overhaul, specifically for our Druid, because this talent right here saves you a good maybe 100 or so globals in a key. Basically, Shred and Rake can be used in any form and will automatically shift you into cat form. You do not need to go cat form and then press Shred and Rake. You'll just press Shred and Rake outside of your cat form and it'll put you into cat form. This is incredibly useful for saving globals, allowing you to squeeze in more damage before you start ramping, and just generally makes the pace of the gameplay a little bit faster. The downside to this, however, is while it may seem like this kind of saves you keybinds with having to shift into cat form and whatever, it doesn't actually. If you're like me and you use Shred and Rake on your main bar for your shift forms, well, if you need to press these in order to go into that shift form, you need to have them on separate keybinds. That's just something to note if you are someone who, you know, struggles with keybinds about this talent. Keep that in mind. But other than that, the Druid class tree is way better. I think generally something like this is going to be a cookie cutter build you'll see most people use. Obviously, again, you have a couple points to spare. You don't have to take Forest Walk. You can put it into 1 Minute Roar. You can even put it into Oak Skin. You can put that into Wellhunt Instincts. You can put it into Primal Fury for more damage. Maim if you want more utility. Innervate if you struggle with mana. You get the idea. You have a lot of room. Well, I say a lot. You have a little bit more room now to work with and make your own decisions as an Ardruid, and that's awesome. I love to see that. So that's good. Before we start talking about the spec tree, we have to talk about the tier set, because the tier set actually interacts with their gameplay a lot. The tier set's pretty simple, actually. Regrowth, Wild Growth, and Swiftman healings increased by 10%. Nothing particularly special about that, just increased healing. Nothing you're going to think about or make a gameplay decision about, just some extra healing. The 4 set, however, that's where things become a little bit more complicated. Your healing is increased by 8% when consuming Soul of the Forest bonus and for 6 seconds afterwards. So what that means is just when you consume Soul of the Forest and you spend it on a regrowth or a wild growth or a rejuve, it'll get buffed by 8%, and also you get a buff for 8% healing increase for 6 seconds after you spend that Soul of the Forest. So you see, at the top right, I press rejuve, I press Swiftman to get Soul of the Forest, I spend that Soul of the Forest on another rejuve, and we get 8% healing increase for 6 seconds. Important to note that it does not stack on itself. So if you're playing double Swiftmend, which you will be, by the way, if you're playing double Swiftmend and you spend 2 Soul of the Forest procs back to back, it will overwrite. It will not stack and add on to the current duration. So keep that in mind. You are going to be spreading out your Swiftmend presses a little bit because of that. So keep that in mind. But it's a pretty important tier set for us to be playing around, and you're going to notice a theme of Swiftmend as I continue. So let's then go over, obviously, Swiftmend synergies. I just mentioned the tier set. We have Cenarius Might. Casting Swiftmend increases your haste by 10% for 6 seconds. This is, I still think, an absurd talent. I think it actually just got nerfed today as I'm making this video. It was 12% haste increase last night when I was recording this video initially. Now it's down to 10%. So that just goes to show you how strong this talent and how volatile it can be, I think, is. This buff does not stack onto itself. So the same way the tier set won't add on to its own duration if you cast it twice, same thing applies to Cenarius Might. It will override itself. So you want to make sure you're spreading out your Swiftmends as best as you can. Obviously, sometimes you're going to need to press double Swiftmend, and that's just, it's going to happen. But ideally, you spread it out as much as you can. Obviously, to add on to this Swiftmend synergy, because it affects our tier set and our hero spec, which is Keeper of the Grove, you're going to play Prosperity. Swiftmend now has 2 charges. This just vastly increases the ability of your tier set to work and the ability of Cenarius Might to work. Not only that, playing double Swiftmend gives you more flexibility with reforestation. It doesn't actually give you more reforestation procs, really, except for like at the start of a key, you get basically 1 extra charge of Swiftmend. But it allows you to have a situation where you're like, oh crap, I'm only at 1 stack of reforestation. I really need to get to Incarn like now. So you can press Swiftmend twice and get into reforestation, which means you're an Incarn, which means you're spawning trees, which means you're getting bonuses from Keeper of the Grove, like Dream Surge and Trance of the Moon. You get the idea. There's a whole little package of synergy going on here, which you don't really see in Wildstalker, which is why I'm not talking about it. But it is very good. Something to note about Verdant Infusion, by the way, this is not a bad talent, but the problem is it doesn't really interact with our tier set or our game plan at all. And it's been nerfed since Dragonflight. It used to extend HOTS by 12 seconds, now it only extends it by 8 seconds. Plus, we also don't have Swarm anymore, and I think extending Swarm with Verdant Infusion was a lot of its value. With both of those things taken into mind, I really don't think there's any situation where you ever play Verdant Infusion over Prosperity. It just interacts way too much with our current tier set and Keeper of the Grove as a hero spec. So, sorry for you Verdant Infusion enjoyers, but that doesn't exist. Obviously, where Swiftmend is, or Prosperity is now, where's Flourish? Flourish used to be here. Flourish shares the same node as Photosynthesis. If you play Druid longer than Dragonflight, you'll actually, this should be normal to you. Photosynthesis and Flourish were always on the same node with each other. And Dragonflight is when they made them separate, but they're back on the same node. This functionally kills Flourish. You're probably, at least in keys, you're pretty much never going to play Flourish, I don't think. The fact that we have double Life Bloom and Verdancy and Rampant Growth and stuff means that, like, Photosynthesis is still going to get obscene value, even after it's been nerfed. You might notice it has been nerfed. Photosynthesis only increases your hot tick rate by 10% instead of 20%, so that kind of sucks, but that's to make up for the fact that Flourish is now on the same node with it. They didn't want Photosynthesis to be so overwhelming, I guess, even though at least for keys, it's still going to be infinitely better than Flourish will. This does still proc Life Bloom on your targets through heals. That hasn't changed. Nothing's changed about that. The synergy is still the exact same. Generally, the way we play our Druid, you know, in keeping up F-Flow and Life Blooms and regrowths on people and stuff, that's all going to generally remain the same. The whole pressing Rejuve on someone who might need it in order to live a mechanic, that's also going to remain the same. Nothing's really changing about that. What is changing is how fast the spec is and how often you're pressing Swiftmend. Prosperity plus Cenarius Might makes the spec, and I'm not kidding when I say this, it makes the spec feel as if you're playing with a permanent Bloodlust. It's actually quite fast. I think it's probably going to be the fastest spec at the start of the expansion, just across the board of any spec, of any DPS spec, of any tank spec. I think it, unironically, might be our Druid because of this talent alone. The pace, I have more haste. It's really funny, actually, if I show you guys. I have more haste right now when I get Cenarius Might than I do on retail currently on my Druid. And the thing is, this only gets better with the more haste you have. I predict later down the line, this is going to be a nerfed talent point. I would keep that in mind for the future, but as it stands right now, spec plays incredibly fast, and I think it's a lot of fun. That being said, obviously, we don't have our tier set from Dragonflight. We don't have random swarms flying around to help us, you know, heal. The room for error on the spec is much higher than it was in Season 3 and Season 4 of Dragonflight. We don't have Flourish, really, to help us ramp and stuff anymore. So you really need to be on the ball with making sure that you're making use of your tier set procs when you absolutely need them, and Cenarius Might when you need them. Something important to note that I haven't actually mentioned is that they buffed the hell out of Regrowth. I actually think if you don't want to play Tranquil Mind, which I think is fine, you should play Improved Regrowth, because Regrowth right now heals for a shit ton. I can't tell you how many times right now I've been on beta and I've pressed Regrowth on somebody, and it takes them with just like maybe Life Bloom and Spring Blossoms from, you know, F-Flow, all the way from 30% to 100%. I don't know why it heals so much, but it feels particularly strong. So you should probably also be playing Improved Regrowth, but I think you can play Tranquil Mind or Improved Regrowth, and I think they're both fine. Something I didn't go over is Trank. Trank, as much as it got buffed, pretty much all the other healer abilities like this, like the mass raid healing abilities, did get buffed for 5-man content. I think Trank still sucks. Really, you still have to stand still to get the full value out of it for 5 seconds, which is not what you want to be doing in keys. It's very easy to get interrupted by, you know, pressing this button. On top of, it doesn't really do that much healing anyway still, and it takes up really awkward talent points. In Dragonflight Season 1, we used to play Tranquility because we needed to get down lower in the tree. Back then, Grove Guardians didn't exist, so this whole row just wasn't worth. Like, Nourish wasn't really, like, just wasn't good enough back then in Season 1 Dragonflight, so we kind of had to go Tranquility just to be able to get down lower in the tree. Now we have Grove Guardians, which we need to take for Keeper of the Grove. There's no reason for us to take Trank to get down lower in the tree. You can take Trank and get down lower in the tree, but the problem is it then restricts, what happens over here on the right of the tree. So if I try to go and get Trank, right, and I want to get down still to Prosperity and still be able to get Reforestation and stuff, I have to take Trank. I'm not able to really spend a point on Inner Peace or anything. It's just too costly for talent points. I have to go down Improved Ironbark, get Regenerative Heartwood, and then get Prosperity. It restricts over here, I think, a little bit too much, just for still, I think, the worst healing cooldown in the game. So, unfortunately, for people who love Trank, it's still, I don't think, going to really be played. Which leads me on to another talent that I really don't think is going to be played, at least not in Keeper of the Grove, which is Call of the Elder Druid. Call of the Elder Druid used to be PvP talent. It was kind of stinky, but it had some situational uses, I think. Now it's just a mainstream talent to take the place of Swarm. Frankly, it fucking sucks. This talent is probably the worst 1 minute damage cooldown in the game. It's very clunky. It's 1 minute, but it only casts when you shift into cat form or bear form or press Star Surge, which is very bizarre and leads to weird situations where you will proc Call the Elder Druid when you don't necessarily want to, or you'll be sitting out of cat form or bear form just so you don't proc Call the Elder Druid. It feels particularly bad. You're pretty much never going to have a key where you get full value out of Call the Elder Druid just because of how clunky and awkward it is to use. But for the purposes of doing damage, it's fine. It's just, kind of a weird 1 minute cooldown, I guess. But I don't think that's better than just doing constant awesome healing with Budding Leaves like we used to. Budding Leaves is still a very good talent. And I think generally you're going to default to this. The talent below, Call the Elder Druid, Dream of Cenarius. This talent I also think is dog trash for the reason of it doesn't match with our Druid's damage or healing profile. If you're a Mistweaver, this will look very familiar to you. It's the same thing as like Teachings, or I think is what it's called, where you do damage with buttons, and then those buttons splash and heal people. While Heart of the Wild is active, Wrath and Shred transfer 150% of their damage, and Starfire and Swipe transfer 100% of their damage into healing onto a nearby ally. This, you would think, is fine, but it doesn't smart heal the way it should. It smart heals and heals injured people, but it doesn't heal the most injured person. So you'll get into situations where you will, let's say you have a Call the Elder Druid, okay, you're in Call the Elder Druid, and you're doing damage with Starfire or Shred or whatever. This is only going to heal probably the tank, which is fine, but if I want to heal the tank, I gotta be honest, I'm probably going to get more healing out of just actually having full hots on the tank than being in cat and pressing Shred or, spamming Starfire. I don't think this talent's very good at all, simply because it doesn't smart heal the lowest person, it just smart heals any injured person. Really, I just think it's a waste of a talent point, and you're going to find much better healing out of pretty much any other talent down here, I think, than Dream of Cenarius, unfortunately. It's a decent amount of healing, but it's not a decent amount of useful healing. It's mostly just healing that you don't really need it to do, because you're an Art-Druid and you already do a lot of passive healing. So, yeah, that's my take on Dream of Cenarius, unfortunately. One interesting thing about this is that it does take all the collective damage. If I remember correctly, it takes all the corrective damage from Starfire, all the little pad damage it does and stuff, and it adds it into that healing. So if you're on a pack of like 30 mobs and you press Starfire, Dream of Cenarius will basically lay on hands a random person over and over, I think. But I don't think that's useful enough to where it's worth a talent point. Speaking of damage and stuff, something important to know about Keeper of the Grove is that there's a very funny interaction right now with Blooming Infusion. This talent basically supposed to mean that every 5 regrowths you press, you get an instant cast Starfire. You can use it on Wrath or Entangling Roots, but generally in keys, you're going to use it on Starfire. And it's every 5 regrowths you cast, okay? We have a talent as our Druid that's really funny called Rampant Growth, which copies the hot from your main regrowth target onto your life bloom targets. For some reason, and I don't know if this is a bug or intended, Blooming Infusion works with Rampant Growth in that when you press regrowth, when you have 2 life blooms out, this is going to give you 3 stacks of Blooming Infusion out of the 5 you need for the instant cast Starfire. So I'll show you right here. Okay, I'll find this mage right here. I'll put Life Bloom on him. I'll put Life Bloom on the mage right here. Put Life Bloom on this guard, and then I'll regrowth myself once. That's 3 to 5. Regrowth myself again. That's 6 out of 5. I get the Blooming Infusion proc. Even though it should be 5 casted regrowth, it's counting for rampant growth. So you get in these weird scenarios where you're going to be getting a lot of instant cast Starfires. Again, don't know if that's intended or not. There are situations where it's actually more DPS for you to be regrowth, Starfire, regrowth, Starfire than just sitting there and spamming Starfire, especially at certain like haste points. And I just think that's really funny. That's something to know about Blooming Infusion and how we do damage as Keeper of the Grove is you're going to be pressing Starfire a lot, you're going to be pressing regrowth a lot. So keep that in mind. You maybe want to get like a tracker for your Blooming Infusion proc, because I don't believe, it tracks itself. It'll kind of just proc and show you when you have met the quota. But honestly, that's about it. As far as, like, again, the general gameplay of our Druid, it's pretty much the same as it was before. Again, you're keeping up your life blooms, keeping up F-flow, keeping up regrowths and stuff. Maybe you keep regrowth up on yourself a little bit more because of protective growth. But that's pretty much it. You're going to rejuve people who need the rejuve. You're going to wild growth to ramp. You're going to press Grove Guardians the same way that you have been before, because really all Keeper of the Grove does is just give you extra bonus healing for the times where you need to press Grove Guardians. So nothing's really changing. Except the pace of the spec and how much you press Swiftmend. You're just going to be pressing Swiftmend and pressing your buttons a hell of a lot more and a hell of a lot faster. But that's pretty much it. There's nothing I haven't told you that you couldn't figure out yourself. Obviously, Trents of the Moon cast Moonfire for you. You don't need to worry about pressing Moonfire pretty much ever. On single target, on mass AoE, you just let the trees do it. Don't worry about it. They will overwrite your Moonfires if enough targets already have Moonfire on them. So keep that in mind. You pretty much don't ever want to be pressing Moonfire with Trents of the Moon. This is a pretty good damage increase, but just something to note. And it is a full Moonfire. It's not like a random bad one that you would think they would have the Grove Guardians cast. It's a full one of your Moonfires. So, but again, that's pretty much it. If you're curious how Keeper of the Grove and Wildstalker work just for each node and stuff, I have another video. Feel free to check that out. And I appreciate you guys very much. Again, feel free to join the Discord or check out my Twitch if you want to catch more of me. I'm always hanging out in my Discord. I'm always talking literally every day, sending good morning posts and stuff. So I would really appreciate it. But I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. Maybe I'll make an HPAL guide if I feel comfortable enough to do that. It's just I know a lot about our Druid. I know a little bit less about HPAL. So I don't know if I'd be comfortable doing that. But feel free to let me know. And if I missed anything, please ask a question in the comments or let me know if I'm wrong about something with our Druid. Other than that, hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. Later.